You're listening to I Have Some Notes, a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported.
I have some notes.
Sure, on what movie? What's the issue?
I have some notes. You have 10 seconds to comply.
Comply to what? Liam, what are we doing wrong?
I am the law. I have some notes. Welcome, everyone, to I Have Some Notes, the movie podcast with cuts, keeps, punch-ups, and tweaks on mediocre movies as suggested by you. I'm your host, Liam Creswick.
I'm Scott C. Bourgeois.
And I'm Greg Beaver.
And today we are discussing Judge Dredd from 1995.
So this is one of those movies that's kind of legendarily bad.
Mm-hmm.
And
as I should say before we get into it, as suggested by user Ethereal Vision. So thanks, Ethereal Visions, for this legendarily bad movie.
Yeah.
Maybe legendarily bad should be in quotes.
Yeah.
Because I know on Rotten Tomatoes it got 22%, which I don't know if that's like some sort of like hindsight, review slant or something like that, but I don't know. Watching it now, it seems perfectly watchable.
Yeah, I had never seen the original Judge Dredd movie. I don't know about the two of you, but I certainly had not gone out of my way to watch it until now. And it was never
seen it.
It's certainly not as bad as I was led to believe. It's very watchable. It's up there with other like schlocky sci-fi popcorn flicks from the 90s, like your Johnny Mnemonics, your Demolitions Man, your Total Recalls. It's right in line with those, and the quality is like I'd say pretty much on par with those two.
Yeah, it had that like gestalt, it had that vibe that made me want to rewatch either like The Fifth Element or Men in Black. Yeah, it was fun.
Certainly the money was on screen. Like, it seems to me that they felt like it was going to be a big hit and they were ready to pay for it. The sets look fantastic. The big matte paintings are great. Special effects still more or less hold up, aside from a few scenes in the flying sequences. And the animatronic robot is really badass and looks like he was cut right out of a comic book. It's great. Yeah,
the robot was my I don't want to say my favorite part, but like definitely my most surprising favorite part. Like, didn't expect there to be, especially because I watched Dredd for the first time this week as well. 2012's Dredd, which I had, much in the way I had been led to believe that this was some sort of unwatchable nightmare, I had been led to believe that Dredd was some kind of auteur masterpiece of cult cinema, and it's fine. It's okay.
Yes, well, Liam famously hates the Dredd movie.
I just said it was fine. My expectations were set so high by you
Fair
guys
enough.
Specifically. But just like everyone on
really
Letterboxd. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it's going to be difficult not to compare Judge Dredd to Dredd. In a lot of ways.
Can I ask right off the bat then, so we don't spend too much time?
Sure.
What was it you liked about Dredd specifically?
I think that Dredd is brutal and vicious in the entertaining way that a good R-rated action flick needs to be. I think there's a lot of really inventive action sequences. I think the film language for the drug, what did they call it? I forget. Slow-mo, which, it's all in slow-mo, but it also has this sort of like lens flary, solarized look to it. I thought that really added a nice extra dimension to it, and it has a payoff in the end as well, which I thought was really fun and clever. And Karl Urban is great as Judge Dredd, and the movie is, but kind of the movie isn't really about him. It's the journey of his sidekick. The sidekick's more the main character if you're following the person who has the arc.
Yeah, which is kind of fitting because Dredd is an immovable object in his own series. Right. Like in the comics, Dredd doesn't really change. He's kind of that way. And the world kind of is shaped around him, which is kind of an interesting take on a character.
Yeah.
And the movie reflects that very well. The movie also is an interesting, almost like slice of life moment in Mega City 1. It's like this is just a day in Dredd's life, and it's hyper violent and it's absolutely nuts. But it was literally just a Tuesday for Judge Dredd. And
I really appreciate that. That like the stakes are like kind of low in the worldly sense of the universe that Judge Dredd inhabits. But the stakes are also intense for everyone that's inside Peachtree's, right? So yeah, I think it was really cleverly built, and just like there's so much good action going on. It's just entertaining on all those levels. So good, simple plot, and plus lots of good action, inventive filmmaking. It's a lot of fun. I wouldn't call it a masterpiece, as you sort of alluded to, but as action movies go, I enjoyed it on the same level as I enjoyed like a John Wick.
Sure. Yeah, and I've heard fair criticism that it's very samey to The Raid Redemption.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is legit. I've seen both movies. They're very similar. But, I mean, they're also both good, as far as I'm concerned. But notably, we actually set a specific rule for this episode, which was we could not just change this movie into Dredd.
Yeah. And I guess then my takeaway was, I think that is all true what you said about Dredd. I don't know why I was led to expect more, but I guess it was just a very, very good, fun, brutal action movie with not a lot else going on. But then now I'm saying that out loud, and it's like, well, what the hell else do you want, bro? Like, what did you... I guess, I'll tell you what I wanted from both these movies, and neither movie delivers on them, but I was led to believe Dredd would, is like some nuance on authoritarianism and like the limits of, police brutality, police corruption, what is letting one person be judge, jury, and executioner look like from a moral perspective. Neither movie touches on those, but I somehow had been led to believe Dredd did, and I guess that kind of left me feeling cold. But now when you talk about it, I'm like, okay, I'm warming up to Dredd.
There you go. You talked yourself around.
I've talked it. It's a fun roller coaster.
But that is a fair criticism because the 2000 AD and Judge Dredd comics are all very much satire. Like they are biting social satire, and in many ways prescient for stuff that we see today with the militarization of the police and with the panopticon that's kind of developing with the surveillance state. And neither movie really digs into that as much as it probably should, rather focusing on how badass Judge Dredd is as a character himself.
Precisely. And I think maybe that's why I was chapped about Dredd, because not only was I led to believe it would have that from the comics, from hype, but also just you'd think it would have the hindsight to like, oh, that's clearly a mark Judge Dredd missed. Let us not make that same mistake again. And I think that's a point against it. But perhaps enough about Dredd. Let us talk.
Now, we're not here to fix Dredd. We're here to fix Judge Dredd.
Yes, and of course, Judge Dredd is the 1995 film, directed by Danny Cannon, written by William Wisher, and Stephen E. D'Souza, obviously based on the comics, Judge Dredd. Stars Sylvester Stallone as the titular Judge Dredd, Armand Assante as Rico, Rob Schneider as Fergie, Jurgen Prochnow as Judge Griffin. Prochnow, good lord. Jurgen Prochnow as Judge Griffin. Max von Sydow as Judge Fargo. And Diane Lane as Judge Hershey.
Stephen E. D'Souza, by the way, also a writer of a little movie called Street Fighter. So he's on his second tour of duty with I Have Some Notes.
Yeah.
That was before my time. But yeah, so this was me and Scott's first time watching Judge Dredd. Greg, had you watched Dredd before? Judge Dredd before?
I'm certain I saw it as a teenager. I did not remember anything about it, aside from I for some reason the scene where they try to get back into Megacidia via the fire tube. That scene was stuck in my head somehow. That's the one thing I remember from it. I don't remember anything else.
Fair. Weirdly, the thing I remember from this, even though I saw it for the first time a couple days ago, because I would have been 8 when this came out in 1995, seeing a big standee of the helmet and the face, like basically the poster, in some old movie theater in Edmonton that I guarantee is not around anymore. Probably the famous Players that used to be in the West Edmonton Mall food court. Maybe the one that used to be in Westmount that's now a Safeway. It is like ingrained in my brain walking through a brown colored Cineplex hallway, or not lowercase c Cineplex, multiplex hallway. And just this big standee. And then obviously my parents are, they let me watch some pretty cool stuff. They were very chill, but they're not taking an 8-year-old to see Judge Dredd. So,
fun fact, when I saw the movie Dredd, the R-rated violent one, there was an 8-year-old in that theater.
Cooler parents than mine, I guess. Yeah, like we said, this was good 90s fun. How does this one rank among Stallone movies for you?
Ooh, I don't know if I'm a big Stallone aficionado. Like outside of like Rocky, Demolition Man, and this one, I'm not sure I've seen a lot of his oeuvre. Like I've seen some of like the Expendables, which are some of the worst movies I've ever seen in my entire life. So I don't know. This ranks in the middle of that.
No love for Death Race 2000 from Greg here.
Nope, I've not seen Death Race.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a middling outing for good old Sly Stallone.
Yeah, I think we did Demolition Man for this podcast as well, and I think I liked Demolition Man just a touch better than this. Mostly because this movie, it definitely has a lot in common with Demolition Man, but it also has a lot in common with a million other movies. Even though it's based on a property, just the general plot beats of this, I was watching this and I'm like, man, I have seen this movie 1,000 times. Whereas I bet to its credit, Dredd, I liked the sort of keep it all in one location, escape from the lockdown building vibe. I'm like, well, at least I'd never seen that in an action movie. Whereas this, I'm like, there's just something about every beat of this Judge Dredd movie that I'm like, I've seen this before.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's a pretty boilerplate 90s action film. Yeah, we've all seen the wrongfully convicted gets revenge to clear their name plot a million times. And while the sci-fi setting is fun, the plot is not, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. Well, let's go to the trailer summary to get that plot out of the way, and then we'll talk about what we liked, what we didn't, and how we can fix it.
As a city, we continue to grow.
73 citizen riots.
Come and get us! Throw down your weapons and prepare to be judged! Judge this! Court's adjourned. Dredd, you're a legend. You are my finest student. Get Dredd! Dredd!
You're under arrest.
What's the charge?
Murder.
The evidence has been falsified!
Guilty as charged.
I never broke the law! I am the law!
You want chaos?
The sentence shall be life imprisonment.
I'm the chaos. Dredd?
Let me crush him, paw!
Excuse me? We're not together.
It's not for this council to play God.
Who says politics is boring?
The year is 2139, and the planet has become an uninhabitable wasteland known as the Cursed Earth. What remains of humanity has crowded itself into massive, overcrowded megacities ruled by senseless violence and autonomous vending machines. When the justice system collapsed, a desperate society turned to a new order of fascists, police, who were granted the authority to carry out the roles of judge, jury, and executioner on site. The most feared among the judges is a 5'10" block of meat named Joseph Dredd, but most just call him Dredd. The alpha judge is all about upholding the law when the law suddenly betrays him, frames him for murder, and ships him off to a penal colony. From this point on, Dredd will carry out the role of reckless murderer, all in an attempt to clear his name. Yeah, he kills a lot of people in this movie.
Yeah, this movie kind of does, like, for a movie obsessed with the law, it kind of doesn't play by its own rules.
Yeah.
Right off the one of the things I found most distracting was that, like, they go to this thing of, like, if you break the law, the judges will judge, jury, and execute you on the spot. And then when he commits a crime, he gets a full American-style trial. Like, Amanda did not watch this with me, and I'm like, well, they frame him for murder, but she did watch Dredd with me, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, oh, he gets framed for murder, and they're like, so they kill him on the spot, right? And I'm like, no, he gets a whole trial.
Now, it is very in keeping with the kind of weird authoritarian system that they go, that the judges would be held to a different standard than the rest of society. So
I suppose, but
like,
it just undermines.
It's a little bit like real life.
Yeah.
It was like real life. The police union would be like, "No, you didn't do anything wrong. Quit looking. Quit asking."
Yeah, we'll move you to a different precinct. It's fine.
Actually, yeah, I think that's maybe the something we should address, that this movie tiptoes right up to criticizing the modern justice system. Definitely doesn't satirize it the way the comic does, and then just, like, either, I don't know if it chickens out, or the studio was like, whoa. I mean, it was 1995. That was peak, American, like, tough on crime bills. Like, Bill Clinton's tough on crime was happening at that time. And I guess just for maybe any of our listeners who might be in law enforcement, work in law enforcement, here in 2022, I'm definitely in the camp of a defund the police mentality. I think modern policing has gotten away from us, and it is time to reform the system. Won't go so far as to say as ACAB, but, like, it's time to reevaluate how we look at the police. If you disagree, that's fair, that's fine. I hope you don't tune out or anything. But this movie had a chance to sort of reflect on some of that, and it doesn't. And I think that's a huge missed opportunity.
I think what's interesting is, like, it adds a whole character whose central purpose is to, show you that the justice system and the judges themselves aren't fair. Like, the way that Judge Dredd treats Rob Schneider's character, like, that's what he's there for. And then they just almost completely forget about it and don't address it at all after the movie gets going. So
Judge Dredd is lawful neutral. Mm-hmm. He doesn't care whether the law is fair. He cares about enforcing it to the letter. And that's consistent throughout. Like, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter what you've done or what the circumstances are. You broke the law, you go to jail. And the movie sets him up to reevaluate that, and never really, you're right, he never really does in the plot. Like, by the end of the movie, he just goes back to work doing what he was doing all along.
Literally. He denies the promotion.
Yeah. Like, he denies the character arc. Like, at the end, he's just, like, washes his hands of it and goes back to work. Like, this was just another Tuesday for Judge Dredd.
Yeah.
Which is, it's such a cowardly way to end the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, especially because they set it up so many times with Rob Schneider's character, with Hershey saying the thing about like, well, you've never heard of extenuating circumstances, with the way Griffin is portrayed as a bad actor, the fact that Rico was a former cop and he can't be, or former judge, and he can't be trusted. He's a literal wild card. Like it's all the pieces are there, and at no point does Judge Dredd, the guy or the movie, ever pick them up and like look at them for more than a second. Yeah,
well, even Judge Prochnow abusing the system to make it even more authoritarian. Like it doesn't examine that. It gets undercut by Rico's like unique form of anarchism. Mm-hmm. It's just the movie has no cohesive theme. It doesn't know what kind of story it wants to tell. And so it just doesn't stick the landing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where, again, not to keep bringing up Dredd, but at least Dredd just eschews all of that and is like, you want to just see some brutal fucked up shit for an hour? Here you go.
Yeah.
At least it doesn't tiptoe up to the line and chicken out. It just avoids it altogether.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like the plot that they've chose, which is wrongful conviction, immediately asks the audience what they think of this justice system, right?
Yeah.
So you're putting it again, yeah, much like a movie we did recently, where it's just like it just walks you right up to it and says, "Hey, what about this?" And you're like, "Okay, what about that?" And then it's like, "No, forget it. Don't worry about it.
Forget it. We're gonna do cannibals and fire tubes and bioengineered superhumans instead. It's a sci-fi movie. Sorry, we asked you to think for a second."
Yeah, the movie shows us this corrupt system, and the system itself turns against its exemplar, who is Judge Dredd. And then at the end, Dredd just like accepts that the system is going to continue without any effort by himself to reform it. Yeah. And that is, again, it's such a cowardly ending. And I get it. In the comics, Judge Dredd is frequently offered promotion and frequently denies it, but he's such a legend by the end that like people get the job of Chief Justice on Dredd's recommendation. He just doesn't want the job. Like that, even that would have been something if he'd been like, "No, you know what? I'm a street judge, but maybe Hershey here has some good ideas because
I thought
she's
that's
got
what
a good head."
Do.
No, nothing. Doesn't do anything with that.
Put Rob Schneider to work in the IT department. No,
yeah,
it's
he just gets on his motorcycle and everybody cheers and claps because Judge Dredd is back on the job.
That was the part that got a bad laugh from me. When they're all like, "Yay, Dredd!" as he's driving away.
Speaking of Rob Schneider, as soon as I saw his name in the credits, and I forgot he was in this, I was like, "Oh, Rob Schneider." The character he plays is kind of annoying, and a lot of really jokey 90s, like I'm the
lovable scamp.
Was it comic relief was the word I was looking for. But weirdly, Rob Schneider isn't bad in the role. Hindsight, he's a creepy right-wing weirdo now, and I don't want to watch movies with Rob Schneider in them in 2022, but like, he does a fine job with a kind of weak character.
Honestly, the whole cast, with one exception, are doing journeyman work here. They're all doing fine. And like, special shout out to Armand Asante, who could not chew the scenery harder. Could not, in 1,000 years, chew the scenery harder. The one person who falls flat in this movie is Sylvester Stallone.
Say that.
He's got a great chin for Judge Dredd and nothing else.
Well, it's a good thing he keeps the helmet on.
The thing is, and Anita and I were discussing this after the fact, I think one of the reasons why this kind of character worked for him in Demolition Man and doesn't here is because in Demolition Man with John Spartan, Sylvester Stallone could put his own stamp on the character. Whereas here, he's trying to play a character who's already iconic amongst his fans. And instead, he's trying to do his own spin on it. He's trying to make it a Sylvester Stallone character, and it does not work. And he doesn't sell it. And it comes off really corny and goofy in a way that I don't think it's supposed to. And it falls flat. Like, he's not great in this film.
Yeah, and like I don't think Schwarzenegger would have done a better job either.
Oh no, goodness no. Because they have too much personality. Say what you will about the Dredd movie. Carl Urban loses himself in the role. Like, you see Judge Dredd. You don't see Carl Urban playing Judge Dredd. With an 80s, 90s action superstar, you're going to see Jean-Claude Van Damme as Judge Dredd. You're going to see Sylvester Stallone as Judge Dredd. You're going to see Arnold Schwarzenegger as Judge Dredd. I don't think that there was an easy fix for that, but Sylvester Stallone just doesn't work.
I think it would have been a special kind of hilarious for Van Damme to be Judge Dredd.
I was just thinking of other like iconic action stars from that time.
But just like even like because he's like kind of like a thinner, wiry kind of action star, and I would have loved to have seen him do the splits in those big huge gold shoulder pads.
Oh man, him doing the splits between two hover bikes. I want to see that Judge Dredd movie.
And I would like to get his read on "I am the law." Like, I think it would be great in that Belgian accent. Would be
couldn't be much worse than Sylvester Stallone's.
I don't know. I don't know if I think his performance was flat. I think for me it was just more like I didn't think anything about it, and maybe that's its own indictment. It felt to me like he was more or less playing the same character like of John Spartan, but Judge Dredd. And but just not being as funny. Like, I think, say what you will about Demolition Man, but at least John Spartan has some pretty good gags in it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Dredd, unfortunately, is a humorless character, so.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least is written as a humorless character.
Certainly, yeah. And which you can understand why they would want put a guy like Rob Schneider up against him, hoping that, like, the juxtaposition of a very serious Dredd versus like this character that's all over the map and a little helter-skelter and like that should, create some natural comedy. It doesn't, but you can see the calculation that they're making.
Yeah, you have to have chemistry between those two actors for it to work, and unfortunately, nope.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure that that Rob Schneider as a comedic actor has a whole lot of dimensions. I like Liam said, or maybe it was Scott. I don't think he was poor in the movie, but I don't think he was. I think in the hands of a better actor, it would have been fine.
Yeah. I guess I just found a lot of the jokes he says are just like real like. Yuckity yuck, I'm the comedic relief. Olaf from Frozen kind of level of like, just like it's my turn to say something funny now.
Yeah.
And you could have put anyone in that role, and we did not get to see the breadths or limits of Rob Schneider's comedic abilities because he was not given material to excel at or fail with. It was bad material off the hop. So you don't even get to see him bungle good material.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Well, I know we all actually have some fixes for this one, and they better comply to our fixes or else. But we'll go to our fixes after we hear from our friends at the Alberta Podcast Network.
Get ready to take the guesswork out of choosing a school. Go to Edmonton Public Schools Open House. Meet the staff and ask your questions to learn about their schools and programs. Explore your options and find a school that feels right. Find event dates and learn how to make the most out of your visit at openhouse.epsb.ca. Know before you go and feel confident and excited when you get there.
We are back, and we are fixing 1995's Judge Dredd. Greg, why don't you got two letters in your name back to back. Why don't you start us off?
Oh boy.
I do too. Hey.
Oh, you do too. I guess, God damn it.
yeah, but like,
nope,
I have the,
keep it
like,
in.
I got GREGG, right? And DREDD, right?
DD.
Yeah.
SCOTT, but it's like there's no Scots walking around SCOT.
Actually, I know a Scot who's SKOHT, so. Also, the Scots would be SCOT. So there's a whole nation of Scotts.
Honestly, I was just looking for a reason to Greg start because he rarely is the one who starts.
Well, I appreciate you guys trying to delay for me because I don't know that I have anything like the thing about this movie that really needs to, like we talked about, like there needs to be some sort of like commentary on the justice system itself, which would have been nice. I think there's something about the climax, like the whole ending action scene, that doesn't work for me. Like I found it very boring, and I'm not sure that I can really like pinpoint exactly why. And it might have something to do with like the character of Rico and like him not being well connected to Judge Dredd and us not getting a whole lot of time with the two of them to really build, you know, some sort of animosity and hatred and all that kind of stuff, because we're only told about their previous relationship. There's definitely no showing going there. So we're already starting from a bad spot, because I think they meet for the first time at the end of, it's either the beginning of the third act or the end of the second act, I guess, depending on where you think that those
pretty sure
off.
It's the beginning of the third act. Yeah.
So that's a no good. So I think like having maybe like a cold open where we actually get to see how their relationship ends might be helpful. And that's my first initial thought.
Do you think you're saying sort of the final battle left you cold? Do you think it might be because Griffin dies at the hands of Rico, and his comeuppance comes at the hand of a better, more interesting villain, or at least a more utilized villain? Like, yeah, the guy that like double crossed Judge Dredd's mentor, right? Yeah, yes, yeah. I think you're right that he technically has a more interesting relationship with Dredd, and he had at least interacted with him more previously in the movie. Yeah.
I just don't. Yeah, this like that character, like if he was played by Wesley Snipes, let's say, I think it would have worked better, because Wesley Snipes put a whole lot of personality into his role in Demolition Man, and I kind of feel like, I think Scott was saying that he was chewing the scenery, but I didn't really find much of what he did memorable. I'm actually struggling to think of any particular line that he had that was memorable. So that's a good place to start, I suppose. It's like villain bad needs some work.
I think that the big fix for Rico is to give him more time with Dredd. I agree with you on that. And I don't know if it necessarily even needs to be a cold open or just the two of them cross paths earlier in the movie. Because one of the reasons why the dynamic between, and we're going to keep referring to Demolition Man on this one. The reason why the relationship between Simon Phoenix and John Spartan works in Demolition Man is because they keep crossing paths. It builds up to that final boss fight, right?
And we get a cold open with him.
We do get a cold open with him. So we said we weren't going to turn this movie into Dredd, and instead we're going to turn it into Demolition Man.
It really is like, yeah. What's like the opposite of a Venn diagram, where it's like neither of the points touch? Like it's these two things, and yet there's no over. I don't know. So then maybe I'm trying to think where in the plot as it exists could you have Rico and Dredd cross paths? Rico has that moment where he goes into the junk cellar, gets his stuff back, or the pawn shop or whatever, gets his stuff back, kills the pawn shop guy, takes the robot. Why wasn't maybe Dredd called to the scene of that murder and, does a little like Judge Dredd forensics? Is like, ooh, this has, I smell his perfume, or some, it's just off the top of my head, like something to make him think like, what if this was maybe Rico?
Or
like,
even just have him cross paths with Rico after Rico breaks out.
Yeah.
Like the word gets out that there was an escape from the prison. Judge Dredd spots Rico on the street. There's like a little chase or a little encounter. Rico gets away, and then Dredd gets framed. And Dredd immediately can be like, I was framed. I had to have been framed by Rico. Like, he's out for me. Yeah. But then there's irrefutable proof that it was Dredd, and then the system turns against him, right?
And that because
Dredd doesn't know that he and Rico have identical DNA at that point.
Exactly. That doesn't undermine the reveal later that they learn they're brothers.
Yeah.
You know, you can still have that. But yeah, that's a great fix for that.
What if Rico is never in prison? What if we actually get to see their relationship straight from the beginning? Like, we get to see... I guess maybe that makes it really long, because then you've got to have Rico get arrested by Dredd and then Rico frame him. So maybe that's not... Yeah. Maybe that's not great.
That extends the movie quite a bit, unless you have Rico as a corrupt cop on the inside the whole time. He never was in prison. He's just a crooked cop. And he gets brought in by the new Chief Justice to do crooked cop stuff.
Yeah, he would be more of an amalgamation of that other chief. You know, you've got Dredd's mentor, and then you've got Rico, who's his partner, who he trusts implicitly, who eventually betrays him, and it's like the last person he would have thought of.
Yeah.
To betray him.
Yeah, the four of them kind of make a nice square of like, there's Dredd's mentor, Dredd, essentially Rico's mentor, Griffin, and then Rico. Mm-hmm. And Dredd and Rico are partners. Griffin and Fargo are partners in being the boss. And maybe it is like Fargo was going to promote Dredd. Something happens to him, dies, he gets wrongfully convicted, whatever. And Griffin steps up, and Griffin's like, I'm not giving the job to Dredd. I'm giving it to my boy, the corrupt guy. If Rico's never in prison, that's maybe how you do that. But,
yeah. I don't know. I think...
I don't know if that's the solution.
I still think the movie is served better, especially if you want to bring in the Project Janus stuff and deal with Dredd's actual comic backstory. If you want to be honest, that his actual canonical comic backstory for Judge Dredd, he was basically a law enforcement super soldier who was bred like Solid Snake, and Rico was his Liquid Snake. But if you want to keep that in, I do think the movie works with Rico having broken out of jail. I still think that you need to have them like see each other earlier in the movie and have encounters that lead up to that final encounter, so that it does become more personal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, without just being told that it's personal.
Yeah. I have a kind of a big... There's a whole bunch of stuff I want to cut and replace with some of the things that I either thought worked about Dredd or could say something about the current state of modern corrupt policing. But right off the hop, I have a bunch of like little cuts or little changes that I want to bang out if I can.
Sure.
First of all, the comic intro at the beginning, where it's just pages from the comic, very 1995 and very like, we've never, other than, you know, Christopher Reeves and, Superman and Batman, we don't make a lot of comic book movies. Hey, everyone, this is a comic book movie. It's based on some comic books. So the whole opening title crawl is pages from a comic book.
Yeah.
I would just cut that. It was very silly.
Yeah.
Especially because the sets look so cool. Like Mega City 1 looks so cool. Yeah. There's no reason you couldn't just have like helicopter footage while the title credits play.
It really put me in a concerned frame of mind. I was like, uh-oh, we're in for something bad. And then like, I guess some relief when the special effects were immediately shown to be, you know, reasonably good. But yeah, that title sequence was no good.
Yeah. So minor cut number one. Other change I want to make. Obviously Rob Schneider. I don't want to watch movies with Rob Schneider in them. So I came up with a list of people I would rather see. And then in sharing that list, I'm going to add, Greg said Matthew Lillard, and why is his name escaping me?
Richard Kind?
Richard Kind would be very funny. Just 1995 SNL guys, Dana Carvey, David Spade, also just 1995 sketch comedy guys, David Allen Greer, Steve Coogan, or my pick, I would have loved to see the role played by Kids in the Hall, Kevin McDonald. He's just so like small and wormier and like, yeah.
I'm going to suggest that maybe it would have been interesting to have him played by a black guy.
David Alan Grier.
Yeah, and that's the name that really jumped out at me was David Alan Grier because, number one, there's no diversity in this cast to speak of. And number two, the law unfairly cracking down on a black guy.
Yeah,
there's the first step in social satire right there.
Yeah.
The hero cop cracking down unfairly on a black guy for a crime he didn't commit.
Yeah. I was just happened to be there, man. I was just holding the bag of Skittles. Like, yeah.
I guess that's the next big question is like, how do we tie that knot for adding some social satire?
I think I have a pitch, but I have a couple more little tiny ones.
Okay,
a couple more tiny things.
One is keep the helmet on.
Oh, yes.
Famously. Why is he taking the helmet off?
Because Sly wanted people to see his face. Because he trampled this movie. He demanded rewrites to make it funnier. And fun fact, Danny Cannon said he would never work with Sylvester Stallone again. So
damn.
I think that's really funny considering that like Stallone arguably has some of the most famous lips of all time. So like he's so easily recognizable from the nose down. So and
he's got a distinctive voice.
Yeah, like no one would have not known it was Stallone. Yeah,
sure.
Which I thought was a very elegant solution in Dredd by having Carl Urban keep the helmet on. Yeah, now we don't have our main character emoting.
I disagree. He emoted a lot with just his chin in his mouth.
Yes, so in a full facial emoting. So by having the sort of female rookie in Dredd be the one with her helmet off the whole time and just be like, well, it affects my telepathy. I thought that was an elegant solution. So we still get Dredd with the helmet on. We still get to see Carl Urban emoting from the mouth down. But we also have a character whose face we can see. Doesn't hurt that she's a nice, pretty looking lady through the whole movie. It was a nice compromise. And I think an elegant solution to that in Dredd.
Yeah. And I mean, in the comics, Dredd is like the only character who just never takes his helmet off. Yeah. Like it's his face essentially. So.
Yeah. And then my last one was just like, as fun as I really liked the scene out in the wasteland, I liked those characters. That fight was fun. It should stay in the mega city.
Yeah.
Right.
It didn't need to leave the mega city at all. What are we doing here?
No, that's reasonable. There's no reason it couldn't have been in the mega city. It's ridden with crime. There's a reason why the judges are there.
Yeah.
Because it's a society that's barely hanging on.
Yeah, why are we leaving? Like, it's the whole like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a pitch for adding some social commentary to it, but I've been talking a bunch. Scott, you got anything? Ideas before
my pitch is to have a more consistent theme. Pick a lane, and basically my pitch is probably going to be similar to yours, which is that the movie needs to be a better social satire and needs to figure out what it wants to say and then say it clearly. Because at the moment it doesn't. It's got a mouthful of marbles and it's spitting them all over the place. And I suspect that your pitch is probably more cohesive than mine because I don't have a specific fix for that. My fix is literally just figure out what you want to say with your movie and say it.
Great. Well, then I do know what I want to say with this movie. I do know what I want to say about the state of modern policing, and corruption, the fallibility of individuals, the forceful boot of authoritarianism. And we've already talked about all the stuff we can take from Dredd. We've already talked about all the stuff we can take from Demolition Man, but I just finished watching Andor.
Mm-hmm.
And that movie does a great job.
Series.
Thank you. That series does a great job, exploring the real nuts and bolts of how fucked up authoritarianism is. And I am mostly just going to kind of crib from what Andor did well and shove that into the middle of Judge Dredd.
Liam is going to take a print of Andor and travel back in time
to 1995 and
shove it in Danny Cannon's face.
Yeah.
Say, do this.
I mean, but yeah, like there is no, before I get into the nuts and bolts of it, there is no reason this couldn't have been like a Paul Verhoeven style, like satire.
Yeah, like RoboCop.
He should have been the director. This movie could have been RoboCop, but even better.
Yeah.
And it, yeah, like both are like, you're not better than RoboCop. What are you doing? Fair. So here's how I figure you do that. You cut the framed for murder subplot entirely. It's been done. And also, like I said, having him in a courtroom undermines the entire concept of having judge, jury, and executioners if he's going to get a fair trial. Like, it just cut the whole framed for murder subplot. And in doing so, now you don't have to have a weird justification for how his DNA was on the gun. So you can also cut all the genetic engineering stuff, which I did kind of like, especially because, quick side plug, in this season of Quantum Kickflip, my other podcast here on the Alberta Podcast Network, it's a cyberpunk story, and my character is a genetically engineered human, so I kind of liked that. But nevertheless, you cut the frame for murder subplot, and therefore cut the genetically engineered test tube brother angle as well. So that all comes out, but now there's a big gap in the middle of the movie. So it starts off with Judge Dredd doing his judging. He meets Schneider, who he judges, and then brushes off the idea of extenuating circumstances. And we get that first seed of the idea that, you know, there's nuance to the law being an imperfect stand-in for morality in our analogy here. Those guys Schneider was hanging out with that he's fighting at the beginning, they're not just some random thugs. They're doing a cool drug. Let's call it slow-mo. But it could be anything. Just they're doing some kind of like they're part of some kind of crime epidemic, and drugs is a nice, easy stand-in for crime epidemics. We still see the scene of Griffin getting all hard on for more control, more power. And his case for doing so is that this drug is running wild in the streets. We need more control. There's more riots than ever because everyone's jacked up on these drugs. In the scene where we would normally see Rico break out of prison, we don't see him breaking out of prison. We find out we meet this guy named Rico, the drug cartel guy. Somewhere throughout the movie, we learn he is a former judge. We learn he used to be a friend of Judge Dredd, who, Dredd then had to judge. But he has been free from prison for years, unbeknownst to Dredd or the rest of the justice system. Basically unbeknownst to everyone except Griffin. Griffin is not only responsible for getting him out and covering it up, Griffin is responsible for helping spread the drug, whether it's slow-mo or some kind of other drug, the same way the CIA orchestrated the crack epidemic. Right? Yeah. So we've got a former judge and a corrupt guy at the bottom of the crime system, and we've got a corrupt guy at the top of the system covering his ass. Great. Do that instead of framing Judge Dredd for murder. So then we just get some cool action beats of Dredd and Hershey on the job looking for the source of the drugs, who's the distributor, who's making it, how does it work. And here is where we really crib from Andor and explore authoritarianism's relationship with a bunch of other aspects of society. So we get a beat where they kind of, we show how the police system props up capitalism and private property. Dredd has a lead that takes him to some kind of business that is protected from judgment because it's a reputable job-creating business. Hell, maybe it's that junk seller guy that we meet early on. But Griffin is a stakeholder or has some kind of influence, foreshadowing that Griffin is pulling the strings and keeping Dredd off the trail. And we explore in that scene authoritarianism's relationship to capitalism. Mm-hmm. Then we get one where we maybe get a little class warfare. Dredd follows a lead to some real bottom of a block, real dregs, and that's where we meet the Angel Gang. They're not out in the wasteland; they're just the worst of the worst. And maybe we can crib from Dredd. Some kind of tower goes into lockdown situation. Doesn't have to, just work nicely. But the Angel Gang is just like the lowest of the low. They're portrayed a little more sympathetically in this version, but they also hate judges, so we gotta have a cool fight with them. We still get to keep the fight with the weird mutant guy. Great, because they're like sewer people or whatever, right? Mm. So there's our class warfare. Dredd's getting too close to comfort for Griffin's taste, so he sends him on a bit of a wild goose chase and to go look for these Angel Gang guys. That's part of it. It's all under dubious pretenses. Dredd survives. Griffin's pissed off about it, so Griffin tries to kind of flip the script, tries to get him arrested. Summarily arrested with no trial, sent directly to a prison block because that's how the judges roll. Again, I hated that there was a trial. And this is where, kind of like in the movie, he reconnects with Rob Schneider's character and kind of finally learns a lesson, has an arc that the system is broken. Because a lot of the prisoners here are addicts or victims of circumstances. They're all related to slow-mo, but the slow-mo is not their fault because the system gave it to them.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, well, these people are all wrongfully imprisoned. Yada, yada, yada. You get where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So now he's got to break out of prison. He's learned that a lot of the prisoners are victims of a corrupt system. We've had his arc. He's learned his lessons. He's learned the nuance of law versus, like, law by the book versus law as a judgment, as a, like, use your judgment, extenuating circumstances.
He's learned the difference between lawful evil and lawful good.
Precisely. Thank you. Gets out, and while he's doing this, while he's briefly imprisoned, incarcerated, Hershey figures out that Rico has been escaped for years, is running the drug ring with the help of Griffin, and then the third act more or less plays out the same with the chase, but now it's a confrontation between Rico, a big-ass robot, and Griffin against Judge Dredd, instead of Rico killing Griffin like he does in the movie. That wasn't actually in my notes. We found that earlier, and I loved that. So Rico is killed because he is a drug peddling creep, and the truth about Griffin is exposed, and Judge Dredd learns the nuances of law. That's my fix.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way of adding not only a bunch of action beats to replace the ones that we kind of took out when you lose the other subplots, but also, like being able to at least have some sort of comment on a justice system writ large.
Yeah. And I'm going to give myself a little pat on the back because that was a lot of me talking, but not nearly as rambly and what's the word? Tangenty as I sometimes get. So thank you. And also yay me.
Because Scott, your hamster wheel looks like it's turning.
Scott, does that satisfy your desire to put some nuance into it? Anything there you want to riff on?
I'm processing it because it was a lot.
It was a lot. Sorry, I started writing and I'm like,
I definitely like that it solves my big problem with the movie, which is that the movie didn't have anything to say about society significantly. It was just like a rote 90s action movie that happened to be about a badass cop in the future. And yours is like, but what if badass cop is working for bad people? And that's better. Which, again, the real movie does try to talk about, but doesn't quite get all the way there. And you go all the way. You take it to the finish line on this one.
Yeah.
So I do like that.
And you can thank Andor for that. So.
Yeah,
I do wonder if instead of Judge Dredd sort of being on the trail of this sort of drug plot, if he spent most of the movie kind of enforcing it. And just like as he's enforcing the law, because that's part of what his whole ethos is like he's sort of like having to like wrestle with the fact that like what he's doing is not good.
My light bulb just they the two of them watching me in the video that we have going would have just seen my eyes light up. Hershey is the one who's actually investigating where the drugs are coming from. Dredd doesn't care. He just cares about stopping the like enforcing the law. It doesn't matter where the drugs are coming from. People are using it, and that's illegal. And I'm cracking down on that. And Hershey's the one who's actually like, no, that we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to find out the source. And she gets in trouble along the way. And that's one of the things that leads Dredd to actually start like turning, because if Rob Schneider goes to jail, who cares? If Judge Hershey is suddenly getting framed for something is up because he trusts Hershey.
Right. Yeah.
And then that starts like Dredd looking into it, and then Dredd ends up getting also like arrested, and now something's definitely broken. Like two good judges have been not just taken off the case, but like taken out in this case. And that's what sets Dredd back towards. And so you got a clearer character arc with him there. And he does start out as just like a jackbooted like enforcer of the law. And then he has to come around. Whereas the lawful good character, Judge Hershey, is the one who's initially like, the drug addicts aren't the problem. Who's giving them the drugs is the problem.
Yeah.
Sweet. I like that a lot. He's such a static character, it teases it out a little more out of him. Yeah.
And Act 1 is Judge Dredd being Judge Dredd, like just doing badass law enforcement, while Hershey is like starting to unravel this mystery. Act 2, Hershey gets in trouble. Dredd cottons onto it. He figures out something's up as well, and then he gets in trouble. Act 3, big prison breakout, overthrow the system, kill Rico.
All the other judges are pissed at Griffin.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That moment he has with Rob Schneider at the beginning should have happened another dozen times.
I legitimately think as well that when Judge Dredd gets thrown in prison, there should be a significant portion of judges who are just like, that's not right.
Yeah.
Like that is the one guy who is incorruptible. Something is wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would actually be cool if some of the other judges broke him out, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's got that seed of like what we talk about in modern policing, where like one of the problems is police unions. Like I love a union. I'm a diehard leftist. We love a union, except for police unions because they're used to cover for the misdeeds of other police officers. That suddenly like the union kind of ends up like either having Judge Dredd's back or turning against Griffin. Like they were all shut up. No one was going to say anything. No one was going to say anything when it was some drug addicts. No one was going to say anything when it was Hershey. But
as soon as it's one of theirs, yeah.
When it's one of our guys, okay, now it's fucking A.
We made a movie that has much more biting social satire.
Yeah.
Call Danny Cannon, get him back to work. So, I feel like I've done a lot of talking. Scott, do you want to read our comments this time?
Sure. We'll change it up. So we did get some listener comments, and of course you can comment yourself by checking out our Facebook and our Twitter, where we always post what movie's coming up next and solicit suggestions. So watch out for our next one and definitely chime in. First comment comes from Aaron Beaver. Aaron Beaver. I don't know who that would be. Anyway,
like the critter.
Yeah. From Greg's lovely wife, Erin. At the end, Judge Dredd has to find himself guilty of mass murder and has no choice but to execute himself because the final fight took out a bunch of innocent bystanders. Yeah, so did the bike chase, actually.
Yeah. That's like a whole building, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, a lot of innocent people got explode. But I guess, when you're in the business of judging, sometimes you got to break a couple legs to enforce the law.
Yep.
Derek Mirren says, I'm due for a rewatch. I watched it a number of years ago for the first time since I was a kid, and it kind of bored me. The characters looked great, though. It was more comic booky than I remembered, in a good way.
Yeah, I think that's a fair evaluation. I don't know if you're due for a rewatch. If you've seen it before, it's fine.
The movie definitely looks good. Like, the production design is exactly that like level of 90s cyberpunk schlock that I love. It's my trash. Mm-hmm. And so I was just like, num, 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 num. I ate that up completely. Robin over at Cinematological says, go back in time and kill Rob Schneider's mother so he cannot be born. Cast an actor that has a... Yeah. Cast an actor that has a passing resemblance to Stallone to be his brother. Send Stallone forward in time to see Dredd so he gets an idea of how to play the character.
Is that necessary to cast an actor who looks like another actor just because they're their brother? I don't know. I don't care. If the movie tells me they're siblings, I'll be fine with it. like whatever they look like. It never really bothers me all that much.
And I mean, they were made from a genetic soup of several of the best judges. So like, I buy it that they might look different.
Yeah.
Two idiots and a dog chime in with, I only really have one note. Keep the effing helmet on, damn it. It was actually a pretty solid adaptation that really leaned into the fact that Judge Dredd was satire.
I don't know.
Got to agree with the first point. Not the second.
It was definitely quirky and funny to a certain extent, but I don't know that it really landed the satire. This is no RoboCop.
Yeah.
No.
Andrew Craig says, Stallone was the problem from beginning to end. I generally really like him, but his ego really got in the way. He had the chance to embody an icon and insisted the helmet come off. Also, could it not be made in the 90s where it seemed like every comic book adaptation screamed, this is based on a comic book we've never actually read?
Yeah, we just took pictures of it for the intro.
That guy has a cool helmet. Let's make a movie.
But on the other hand, I mean, the movie actually cribs from Judge Dredd's canonical comic backstory for himself, for Rico. It borrows some of the characters from the comics, like Judge Hershey. Like, it did its homework. And I'm wondering if the original script, not the script that got punched up, quote unquote, by Sylvester Stallone, maybe was a lot closer to like the film, and maybe was even a better satire. Who's to say, right?
I feel like that happened a lot in early comic book adaptations where the studios or producers had no faith in the source material. So, like, probably most of the original drafts of comic book movies from that era were a lot more in kind with the source material, but then when studio execs got a hold of it, they started giving it all the 90s tropes that they thought would earn the most money.
They decided to give it some notes. Mm-hmm. Friend of the pod, Olav Rockney, says this movie features the finest performance that Rob Schneider has ever given. That is to say, he's only awful in this movie instead of execrable. Did I say execrable right? That's a word I've seen a dozen times. I don't know I've ever said out loud.
As far as I know, you said that correctly.
I'm even just jealous you've seen that word a dozen times, because that's frankly a new one for me. I'm going to quickly Control V there. Extremely bad or unpleasant, says Google.
Yeah, it's as though excrement. Basically,
yep, I think you pronounced it right.
Basically, send Schneider to the Titan penal colony and you'll have a much better movie. And Sean McKnight says, here's my note, just watch Dredd, starring Carl Urban.
There you go. It is the superior movie.
Of the two, definitely.
It was a fun double feature for me. I watched them about 3 days apart, both for the first time. Dredd first, then Judge Dredd. It's interesting. I almost want to see them. I feel like I've said this about a movie before, but like, I want to see them make another one in 10 years. Just like every 10 years, we'll like see if someone can get Judge Dredd right.
There were a lot of people who were asking for Dredd 2 with Carl Urban. And there was nothing on that for years, especially because apparently like they tore everything down. Like they sold off the sets, they sold off the costumes, they had nothing. And then recently word got out, they're making a Dredd 2 with Carl Urban. So
it's going to be really interesting because like if you won't really be able to get around the authoritarianism of it all this time around. So it'll be interesting how they try and approach it this time.
Yeah, maybe we'll finally get that biting social satire we wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Learn, especially, not only do we have everything that's happened from 2016 onward to learn from, but also you've got Andor to learn from.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Be interesting to see what they do.
Fantastic. Thank you everyone who commented, and thank you for listening. It's been a really fun edition of I Have Some Notes, and I hope we get to hear this back soon. You can follow us on social media at I Have Some Notes on Twitter, at I Have Some Notes Pod on Instagram, Facebook.com/I Have Some Notes, and wherever it is you're listening to this, please like, subscribe, rate, review, what have you.
Hey, this movie featured a conspiracy by the highest echelons of society to stomp on the neck of society with their jackboots all the harder. That sounds like a conspiracy, and It's a Conspiracy is a podcast where Andrew, Charlie, and Greg lay out the beliefs behind conspiracy theories, myths, and more. You can check that out right now at albertapodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, I mean, if you've been following this podcast for a while, you know that we give notes to movies every couple weeks, so see you in a couple more for more A Note Having.
Until then, I've been your host, Liam Creswick.
I'm Scott C. Bourgeois.
I'm Greg Beaver. Keep watching the I was going to try and do an accent. Didn't work. The skies!
The skies.
There you go. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Bonkink.
I'm Andrew Paul.
And we're the hosts of the Well Endowed Podcast.
The Well Endowed Podcast is produced by Edmonton Community Foundation, or ECF as we call it.
ECF provides grants to charities through the endowment funds we create and manage with our donors.
Hence the title of our show, The Well Endowed Podcast.
Every month, we bring you a collection of stories and interviews with fascinating guests who are working to make Edmonton a strong, vibrant city to live in.
Through these stories, we look at the space where endowments intersect with your communities.
So if you're interested in the people and issues impacting your community, check out thewellendowedpodcast.com.